So here we are at the first stop of the Boston's Women Heritage Trail, the Beacon Hill tour. The first stop on the tour is Mary Dyer, who was an English and colonial American Puritan turned Quaker, and she was hung in the Boston Common for repeatedly defying a Puritan law banning Quakers from the colony. So she was hanged on the Boston Common, and here's her statue right here by the State House. So here we are at the second stop of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail, Beacon Hill. We're on Chestnut Street. And the second stop is 13 Chestnut Street. And this is the home of Hephzibah Clark Swan, this one over here. And then over here at 17, we have the house of Julia Ward Howe. And they were one of the first 5 original members of the Mount Vernon Proprietors, whose goal was to transform Beacon Hill into a fashionable neighborhood, which it is. It's so pretty. Then we have 17 over here. Here we are at the third stop of the Beacon Hill tour of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. We're at the Nicholas House Museum. It's at 55 Mount Vernon Street. Now, this was the house of Rose Standish Nichols. She was among the first well-known woman in landscape architects and a lifelong pacifist who lived on Mount Vernon Street her entire life. She traveled extensively throughout the world and developed an interest in international politics. She left her house to the public and as a place for offices of organizations promoting international friendship. It's now a museum. So you can pay $10 from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Tuesday to Saturday, and you can go see where she lived. So here we are in the fourth stop of the Beacon Hill tour, Boston Women's Heritage Trail, 45 and 47 Mount Vernon Street. It was the Portia School of Law right here. All these buildings. Portia School of Law began in 1908 when 2 women who wanted to take the Massachusetts bar examination asked attorney Arthur W. McLean to tutor them. His wife, Bertha McLean, named the school after Portia, who disguised herself as a lawyer in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. In 1923, Blanchard Woodson Braxton, a graduate of Portia Law in 1921, became the first African-American woman to be admitted to the Massachusetts bar. She later became the first African-American woman admitted to practice in the U.S. District Court in the state. So here we have where the Portia School of Law used to be. So here we are at 6 Pinckney Street, home of Bwht Payif. Right here behind me was her home. She's known as the subway sculptress because in her spare time during work as a toll collector at the Park Street subway station, she created clay models for her studies at the Museum of Fine Arts. She was a Russian Jewish immigrant who lived with her family at this address right here where we are. Her most controversial work, the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial, stands in John Paul Jones Park in Kittery, Maine. Although she made changes to soften the work at the request of the governor, she originally wanted to depict the horrors of war, saying, quote, "We should set up memorials that make us loathe war instead of admire it," unquote. And this is it behind me, the house that she lived in. Next on the Boston's Women's Heritage Trail Beacon Hill edition, we were at 15 Pinckney Street. Elizabeth Peabody's kindergarten, one of the locations for the kindergarten of Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, considered the founder of the kindergarten movement in the United States. Although this was destroyed and built again, the mirror image of 17 Pinckney Street, which is right over here, influenced by the ideas of Frederick Froebel, Peabody became an advocate for kindergartens nationwide. So here we have it right here. 15 Pinckney Street. And then we have 17 Pinckney Street over here, which that building was mirrored after it was destroyed. So we have 17 right here. Here we are on the 6th stop of the Beacon Hill Tour of Boston Women's Heritage Trail. We're at 20 Pinckney Street, and this is the home of Louisa May Alcott. Although author Louisa May Alcott is best known for her book Little Women, describing her family life in Concord, Massachusetts, she has had several Boston homes. The daughter of famed transcendentalist Bronson Alcott, she lived here and rented rooms as a child. So here it is right here, the home where she lived in. So here we are at the 7th stop of the Beacon Hill Tour of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. We're at the Museum of African American History and Abel Smith School, the Museum of African American History, which was founded in 1964 by Sue Paley Thurman, acquired the Neighbors African Meeting House in 1972. Among its former directors was Ruth Batson, a leading civil rights activist in Boston. She was chairperson of the Education Committee of the Boston NAACP that led the fight to the early 1960s against segregation in the Boston public schools, and founder and later director of the METCO Voluntary Discretion Program. So here we have it right here. We're at 46 Joy Street. So we have the museum right here, Museum of African American History. Exhibits, tours, shopping, Monday through Saturday. Now we're approaching the African Meeting House, which was the first African American church built in 1806. Also part of the Museum of African American History. We are on Court Street. And here it is. This is the first African American church. Here we're at 67 Joy Street. It's the home of Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler. She was the first African American woman to earn a medical degree in 1864 from the New England Female Medical College. She lived at 67 Joy Street in 1869. So this is where she lived. So here we are on the 10th stop of the Beacon Hill Tour of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. We're at the Vilna Shul, which was a synagogue. It was built in 1919 to serve the Jewish community on Beacon Hill, and it was a community center for Jewish people. It closed in 1985, and the building has been restored as a Jewish cultural center. So yeah, basically, they're doing some construction right now, but it's super pretty. You could see over here they have writing in Hebrew. It looks like they're gonna redo it. So yeah, closed for renovations. Should be super pretty when it's done. So here we are at the 11th stop of the Beacon Hill Tour Boston Women's Heritage Trail. It's the view of Mass General Hospital, where Linda Richards pioneered professional nurses training at Massachusetts General Hospital, and in 1873 she had received the first diploma from the country's first nursing school, which was organized at the New England Hospital for Women and Children. So basically we have the view of Mass Gen back there. We're on the corner of Phillips and Grove Street. Yeah, this is number 11. Here we are at the 12th stop of the Beacon Hill Tour Boston Women's Heritage Trail. We're actually with somebody who lives in the Hayden house, and he just wants to say a few words about the history of the Underground Railroad and everything they did here.
Okay, Lewis and Hayden lived in this house from probably the mid-1840s on into Lewis's death in 1889. It was a major stop on the Underground Railroad in Boston. Lewis and his wife Harriet were both had been former slaves. They had escaped from Kentucky with some help from some people from New England. Their names were Calvin Fairbank, and Delia Webster, who were associated with Oberlin College in Ohio, and they met Lewis as he was working as a hired. His master had farmed him out to work in a hotel. They met Lewis there. They said, "This guy's a pretty sharp guy. Let's get him out of his slave stuff." They took a big chance. They got him out of there. He went to Michigan. He could have gone to Canada, but he saw what was going on in Boston. This is a major center of the abolitionist movement. This was in the 1840s. So he wanted to get into it. He hated slavery. He had been through it. He'd been seeing his family sold out from under him. His first wife and child were sold. He never saw them again. They were sold for like just money, whatever. They were like property. Lewis himself was sold for like eight horses.
Oh wow!
I mean, this is the life. He hated slavery. He wanted to do what he could. He came here because of the man who ran the paper called The Liberator, whose name is okay. Just had it. It'll come back to me. But he ran The Liberator, a huge paper, all campaigning against slavery. So basically, Hayden was here, and he was able to help slaves escape on the next leg of their journey on to mostly Canada, where they could be free because they could be.
Boston Women's Heritage Trail, home of Susan Paul, 36 West Cedar Street. In the 1830s, Susan Paul taught at the Smith School on Joy Street, a segregated school for African-American children funded jointly by the city and private donation. Paul was also an officer in the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society, which was founded by Maria West Chapman in 1832. She was the daughter of Thomas Paul, the founder of the African Baptist Church, and supported her mother after his death. Some of her letters were printed in William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator. In 1834, she wrote to condemn the spirit which persecutes us on account of our color, that cruel prejudice which deprives us of every privilege whereby we might elevate ourselves, and then condemn us because we are not more refined and intelligent. So that's a famous quote by her. And home of Thomas Paul. This was formerly known as 26 George Street, First Minister, African Baptist Church, missionary to Haiti. So here we are at the 14th stop of the Beacon Hill tour. This was St. Margaret's Convent, originally founded in Sussex, England in 1855 to care for the poor and ill in the surrounding countryside. This religious community came to Boston in 1873 to act as superintendents of a children's hospital. The sisters moved to 3 townhouses on Louisburg Square in 1883, where we are right now, which they used as a convent, chapel, and small hospital. Here they expanded their nursing and teachings to reach the sick and poor on Beacon Hill and its environment. So that window that I just showed you marked the Anne Whitney studio, and it was kind of like a landmark to let people know that that was her studio. If we come over here, there's a plaque. This is 92 Mount Vernon Street. She was a sculptor, and she's known for her Sam Adams sculpture, which is now in front of Faneuil Hall. A lot of her sculptures are in different parts of America, and she contributed a lot to women's history. She was an artist, and this is where her studio was. 15th stop, this is 76 Mount Vernon Street, and it's the home of Margaret Deland. She was a popular novelist at the turn of the 20th century and social reformer. Her 25 works of fiction were set both in historical and modern times and dealt with making ethical decisions in different settings. Although she considered herself a new woman determined to preserve her freedom of action, she did not support women's suffrage. Her charity was personal. She took young, unwed mothers into her home until they could become self-supporting, believing that their love for their babies would provide an incentive. So basically, she would house single mothers and help them out to get back on their feet. This is the plaque, 1857 to 1945. She was an author, and she's best known for her novel, John Ward Preacher. She was elected to the National Institute of Arts and Letters in 1926. So here we are at the 17th stop of the Boston Women's Heritage Trail, Beacon Hill. This is the house of Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, and this was actually also where the Women's Era Club was. So basically, she was an African-American editor and publisher of the Women's Era, the Journal of the New Era Club, lived here for 2 decades. She founded the Club for African-American Women in 1894. A year later, she organized a national conference to form the National Federation of African-American Women to show the extensive of large and growing class of cultured African-American women. So basically, they would come here and house meetings and just talk about things that needed to be done in the community to make the lives better for women and African-American people in general. So here we are at 103 Charles Street.